Compassion knows no age. Sometimes it arrives in the smallest hands, wearing the warmest heart. Sevens. The frost had returned, thick as memory and cruel as loss. In a mountainous frontier settlement nestled between pine-covered ridges and icy streams, winter didn't just arrive, it laid siege. The roads were brittle with frozen mud, the wind sliced like broken glass, and the sky above had forgotten how to smile. Amid this bleak canvas, life went on. Wagons rolled in from the passes, laden with goods and stories. Fires crackled in hearths behind shuttered windows. And outside the trading post, standing like a scrap of hope against the biting wind, was an 8-year-old girl named Magnolia Voss. They called her Maggie. She wore a too large woolen coat, brown, stitched by hand, and only recently hers. Her breath puffed in cloudy bursts, her cheeks red from the cold. But Maggie was used to the freeze. She'd grown up on it, same as she'd grown up on oatmeal, pine smoke, and the gentle strength of her widowed mother, Clementine. Inside the trading post, Clementine was bartering. Spools of thread, fire salts, hand-stitched satchels. Her voice, firm but kind, rose now and again above the clatter of trade. Maggie didn't mind waiting. She liked watching the world, even when it bit. That's when she saw him. He was hunched beside the blacksmith shop, where the frost clung hardest and the wind rarely showed mercy. An old man, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that was barely more than a memory of warmth. His long gray hair was braided with leather and beads, artifacts of a culture most settlers knew only from stories, half remembered and half believed. No one noticed him, or they did and chose not to see. One man turned his head. A woman adjusted her scarf and hurried past. Even the town pastor gave a fleeting glance and moved on. Maggie didn't. She saw his hands first, trembling, blue at the knuckles. Then his eyes, tired, sunken, but still burning with something ancient. There was quiet dignity in how he suffered, even in silence. She didn't think. She only felt. Maggie walked up to him, snow crunching beneath her small boots. The wind shoved at her, demanding she return to safety. But something stronger moved inside her, some kind of fire. The old man looked up, startled. He expected ridicule, or maybe nothing at all. Instead, Maggie began unbuttoning her coat. The cold hit her like a slap, piercing the thin dress beneath. But her hands didn't tremble. She took off the coat and extended it. "Sir," she said, "you need this more than I do." Sevens. The man stared. His name was Sterling Rhodes, and he had once been called a keeper of old ways. He'd seen decades of winters, but nothing like this. Not the cold, but the gesture. "No one has ever," he began, voice cracking. "Please," Maggie insisted. He reached out. Not just for warmth, but for something that had been gone so long he almost forgot it had a name. Sterling wrapped himself in the coat, and warmth spread not only over his shoulders but through something deeper, buried beneath years of loss and bitterness. And Maggie smiled. What Maggie didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her gesture was not small. Not to Sterling, not to his people. Among them was a tradition so old it had nearly died. Sahani Nukwa, the selfless gift that must be honored. Sevens. It hadn't been invoked in over 30 years. Sterling rose, slowly, painfully. His legs numb, but his spirit ignited. He had to reach his great-nephew, Gideon Nash, tribal leader and keeper of the circle. The old ways could not be ignored when the spirit of them was made flesh by a child's heart. He turned toward the eastern ridge. 2 miles of snow and silence lay between him and the settlement of his people. But Sterling walked. Clementine noticed her daughter's shivering form as she emerged from the back room. "Maggie, where is your coat?" "Sevens. I gave it away, she replied softly. An old man was freezing. Sevens. Clementine blinked, then gathered her daughter in her shawl, both proud and terrified. Maggie, sweetheart, that was kind. But we'll need to talk about staying warm, too. Sevens. I know, the child whispered. But his hands were blue. Mama. I think he needed someone to care. Sterling Rhodes walked. Each step was heavy with cold and memory. The snow clung to his thin shoes, numbing what strength remained. But wrapped around his shoulders was the small coat, the child's coat, and within it, a warmth that pulsed deeper than mere body heat. In his heart, something old stirred. The stories his grandfather had told him as a child weren't just myths. They were maps, codes of honor written in the bloodlines of his people. And now, after decades of silence, those words returned, as vivid as fire. Sevens. When one gives from hunger, not plenty. Sevens. When one chooses kindness without. Sevens. That gift becomes sacred. That soul becomes marked, and the circle must rise. Sevens. Sterling whispered the words like prayer. By the time he saw the smoke of his people's fires curling into the pale sky, his legs were shaking, but his purpose had never been stronger. The tribal settlement was modest but rooted, homes built from timber and stone, crafted with care and memory. Sterling made his way past children playing near the hearth and women hanging herbs in the cold air. He found Gideon Nash in the communal yard, bent over a worn saddle, repairing the leather with expert hands. At 45, Gideon was the very image of quiet strength. Not a man who demanded respect, but one who naturally received it. Uncle, Gideon said, surprised by Sterling's sudden appearance. Tunturna, you shouldn't be walking in this cold. Sevens. I had no choice, the old man rasped. Something has happened. Something sacred. Sevens. Gideon stood fully upright, noting the small brown coat draped over Sterling's shoulders. His brow furrowed. Tell me everything. Sevens. And so Sterling did. He spoke of the girl, of her hands, trembling but steady, of the coat, her only one, of the moment that stirred something ancient in his bones. Gideon listened in silence, then closed his eyes for a long moment. Sahani Nukwa, he whispered. Sterling nodded. It has returned. Sevens. Within the hour, Gideon summoned the Council of Elders. The youngest was 62, the oldest, near 90. They sat around the sacred fire, wrapped in ceremonial shawls, and listened as Sterling recited the morning's events again, this time invoking the ancestral phrases required by tradition. He ended with the words, Sevens. The heart of a stranger's child now carries the light of our people. Sevens. The fire cracked. Silence hung, heavy and holy. Then the eldest woman among them, Grandmother Thalia, spoke. Sevens. If this child gave without fear, we must answer without delay. Sevens. That afternoon, the entire tribal settlement transformed. Grandmother's open chest wrapped in buffalo hide, retrieving sacred beadwork not worn since the last Sahani Nukwa, 3 decades prior. Children were gathered and told the story of the first generous heart, a tale passed down through generations, now awakened in real life. Hunters stopped their daily routes to carve tokens of courage. The women began preparing a ceremonial coat, using materials reserved for only the most honored among their people: elk hide, mountain fox fur, and white shell beads, each one telling a piece of the story through pattern and color. Everything was in motion. And yet, Gideon knew, tradition required more than beautiful gifts. It demanded understanding. The gifts had to match the receiver's story. So, He gave Sterling a task. Return to the settlement, Gideon said. Learn who the Gurr. Sevens. We must give what touches them, not what impresses us. Sevens. Sterling bowed his head. He would walk again. Meanwhile, in the town's trading post, life moved forward. Maggie was helping her mother repack bundles of dried herbs and hand-knit gloves. Her fingers were stiff, but she never complained. Clementine, however, watched with growing concern. She knew what that coat had cost. Not in coin, but in risk. There would be no new coat until spring. Come warm up by the fire, she said, wrapping an old quilt around her daughter's shoulders. I'm okay, Mama, Maggie said, her smile faint. I keep thinking about his face. The old man. He looked surprised, like he forgot people could be nice. Sevens. Clementine said nothing. But in her heart, something deep and unspoken took root. Just before sunset, as the sky bruised into violet, Sterling returned. This time, he did not sit in the cold. He entered the trading post with care, drawing glances and whispers. People recognized him as the old man from the blacksmith's wall. But there was something regal in his posture now. Something changed. He approached Clementine and bowed his head. Ma'am, he said softly, I come with thanks, but not only mine. Sevens. Clementine narrowed her eyes. Maggie peeked from behind the counter. Sterling met the girl's gaze. You gave me more than warmth, he said. You gave hope. And among my people, that is not forgotten. It must not be. Sevens. He turned to Clementine again. My family wishes to invite you both to our home before sunset fades. Sevens. There was hesitation, of course. Trust was not easily given between settlers and native tribes. Too much history, too much silence. But Clementine had always been a listener. She studied the old man's face, the sincerity in his voice, then looked at her daughter, still without a coat, still smiling. All right, she said. It will come. True generosity not only gives, it invites others to witness, to remember, and to rise. Sevens. Clementine packed quickly. A shawl, dried biscuits, Maggie's mittens, and the old quilt that once belonged to her husband. Maggie, wide-eyed, was already at the door, her bare arms wrapped in the blanket but her feet dancing in excitement. Sterling led the way. They passed curious eyes, settlers peering from windows, whispering across fences. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked on in silence, unsure what to make of it. Martha, the school teacher, watched from her porch. You go, Clementine, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. There's something worth learning here. Sevens. The journey to the tribal settlement took nearly an hour. They walked across a frozen meadow glazed with the fading sun. Icicles hung like glass knives from fir trees, and the snow muffled every sound but the crunch of boots. Sterling said little, but every step he took was purposeful. This was no casual invitation. When the first smoke pillars of the village came into view, Maggie clutched her mother's hand tighter. Are they waiting for us? She asked. Clementine nodded. Seems like they are. Sevens. And indeed, they were. At the heart of the village, a large clearing had been transformed. Blankets of bright patterns were spread upon the snow. Lanterns of dyed hide glowed with warm orange light. Every member of the tribal community had gathered, dressed in ceremonial attire that shimmered with beadwork, feathers, and years of heritage. At the center was a space kept open, a wide ring in the snow. Gideon Nash stood just beyond it, tall and calm, his presence commanding. Beside him, Grandmother Thalia and the other elders waited in silence. Clementine and Maggie stopped at the edge of the circle. Sterling extended a hand, not for ceremony, but for welcome. "Come," he said gently. "You are not guests. You are the story." Sevens. As they entered the circle, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. Even the wind seemed to pause. Gideon raised his arms. "Today," he began, "we honor what we have nearly forgotten. A gift given without condition. A heart revealed without fear." "Sevens!" His voice was deep and clear, echoing through the cold. He turned to Maggie. "Child of another people, your act has awakened the oldest part of ours. You gave your only coat to a man you did not know. You saw not what divided us, but what made us both human." "Sevens." Maggie blinked, her cheeks flushed from cold and attention. Clementine held her close. "Among our traditions," Gideon continued, "when someone shows such selflessness, they must not be thanked with words. They must be remembered with legacy." Sevens. One by one, members of the tribe stepped forward. An elderly woman knelt and placed a pair of fur-lined moccasins at Maggie's feet, embroidered with symbols of protection. A woodcarver offered a small totem shaped like a bear cub, representing bravery through gentleness. A young girl, perhaps Maggie's age, handed over a woven bracelet. "It's for friendship," she whispered shyly. Each gift was placed before her not as payment, but as witness, as recognition of what she had done. Maggie looked up at her mother, who was weeping silently. Finally, Gideon turned and gestured. Two women stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in deep blue cloth. As they unfolded it, gasps moved through the crowd. The coat was exquisite. Crafted from elk hide so soft it shimmered like silk, with a lining of thick fur. Beaded scenes decorated its surface, each one telling part of Maggie's story. A girl by a fire, a stranger in the cold, a coat held out with small hands. "This," Gideon said, "is the coat of the generous heart." Sevens. It bears not only warmth, but belonging. From this day forward, any person who sees this coat shall know the one who wears it is protected by all of us. Should danger ever find her, it will have to pass through all our hands first. Sevens. Sterling stepped forward with a small pendant of carved stone and bone. "This is the mark," he said. "It travels with her, wherever she goes. Our spirits recognize it." Sevens. Then came the singing, low, rising, ancient. A melody that wrapped around the gathering like smoke, gentle but powerful. It had not been sung in 30 years, but every voice remembered. Clementine had never heard anything like it. Maggie stood still, the coat now draped around her shoulders. It fit perfectly, as if the threads of the past had measured her soul before the cloth was ever cut. The song ended in silence, the kind that leaves you changed. Not all treasures shine. Some are wrapped in fur and memory, and worn by those who dared to care first. Sevens. As the final notes of the ceremonial song melted into the quiet snowfall, the air shifted. The ceremony was far from over. Gideon remained standing, his breath curling in the air as he raised one hand. "What you have seen," he said, "is not the end. It is the beginning." For the circle of generosity is not satisfied with tribute. It calls for change. It asks us to remember and to act. Sevens. He stepped forward, kneeling before Maggie. She stood still, the new ceremonial coat glowing in the firelight, her face lit by both awe and the weight of something she didn't yet understand. "This coat is not only for warmth," Gideon said. "It is a signal to the spirits and to the living. It marks you as one who gave without expectation. Now, we give back in a way that never ends. Sevens. He opened his hand. In it lay a pendant, a small disc carved from river bone, set with a single bead of turquoise in the center. Etched around its rim were the oldest tribal symbols, the spirals of continuity and the wings of the bird that watches over the selfless. This is the sigil of our people. It belongs to you now. And wherever you go, if you wear this, our homes are open to you. You are not a visitor. You are kin. Sevens. Maggie looked up at her mother, who nodded through tears. She reached out and accepted the pendant. Grandmother Thalia rose. When I was a girl, she said, her voice soft but unwavering, my grandmother told me of a child like this, a child who gave without asking. That child became the first to wear the coat of memory. And now, you are the next. Sevens. She gestured toward the fire pit, where coals glowed bright. Come, she said to Maggie, walk with me. Sevens, hand in hand, they circled the flame. With each step, tribal members chanted in rhythm, echoing the heartbeat of the community. The fire remembers, Thalia said. The land remembers. Sevens, the ancestors remember. Sevens, with her free hand, Thalia sprinkled cedar leaves and dried sage into the flame. And now, you will be remembered. Sevens, after the ritual walk, Gideon once again addressed the gathering. The circle of generosity was not meant only for us. It lives best when it is passed on. Sevens, he pointed to the large wooden staff that had been planted upright at the edge of the circle. Carved into its shaft were marks from generations past. Some were old and faded, others recent. This was the staff of witnesses. This staff will now travel, he explained. It will live 1 year in each community, ours and yours. Wherever it stands, acts of selfless kindness will be recorded, shared, and celebrated. Sevens. Sterling stepped forward, now holding Maggie's original coat, the brown woolen one she had given to him. He folded it gently and placed it at the base of the staff. This, he said, is where the new marks begin. Sevens. As the ceremony moved into gentle celebration, warm stew, shared songs, and children laughing, Clementine stood back, holding a steaming bowl of broth and simply watching. She had not expected any of this. She had not even expected to be seen. But these people didn't look at her with suspicion or charity. They looked at her with welcome. Maggie ran up to her, her cheeks red from the cold and joy. Mama, they gave me this comb. It's made from elk horn, and this pouch has real sage in it. It smells like the mountains. Sevens, Clementine smiled, brushing hair from her daughter's face. I think we've become part of something bigger, sweetheart. Sevens. Like a story? Maggie asked. Yes, Clementine whispered. Just like a story. One act of kindness does not end at the edge of a coat. It walks, it echoes, it teaches. Sevens. The sun rose slowly over the snow-covered settlement, casting a golden veil across rooftops and tree lines. The trading post was busier than usual for that early hour. Word had traveled fast, faster than any wagon wheel. Everyone was talking. Some spoke in awe, some in doubt, others in discomfort. But no one was silent. Maggie and Clementine had returned just after midnight, wrapped in stories and symbols, bearing gifts too precious for coin to measure. Maggie had fallen asleep the moment her head hit the pillow, her ceremonial coat folded beside her like a sacred blanket. Clementine, however, had not slept. She sat by the fire until dawn, watching its flicker reflect off the carved pendant her daughter now wore. Something had shifted, not just in her, but in everything. By mid-morning, townspeople had assembled outside the trading post. Henrik, the shopkeeper, skeptical by nature and bitter by habit, stood at the front, arms folded. "Mark my words," he muttered to a growing crowd. "They're up to something." "Sevens," others mumbled agreement. The line between tradition and threat was still blurry for many of them. It always had been. But then Martha arrived, straight-backed, calm, and wearing her schoolteacher's scarf like armor. "You're wrong, Henrik," she said. "Nah, what happened wasn't politics. It was human." "Sevens," Henrik scoffed. "They gave a coat. So what?" "Sevens." "No," Martha replied. "A child gave the last thing she had to someone she didn't know. And they didn't just give back. They remembered. That's the difference." Sevens, as if summoned by their words, a distant sound began to rise in the east. Drums, slow, steady, approaching. It was like nothing the town had ever seen. Led by Gideon Nash, the tribal delegation moved through the snowy road with quiet purpose. Sterling walked beside him, the small brown coat still folded neatly in his arms. Behind them came families from the tribal village, men, women, children, all in ceremonial dress, carrying carved boxes, woven fabrics, and painted tokens. The staff of witnesses came too, carried upright by two strong hands, its surface catching the morning sun. As the procession entered the town square, silence fell. Every eye watched. Gideon stepped forward. "We come not to take, but to give, to tell a story, and to plant a seed." "Seven," Gideon spoke clearly, not just in volume, but in meaning. "Yesterday, a child from this town, your town, saw a man in need and gave him her only coat. She did not ask where he came from. She did not wait for thanks. She acted." Sevens. "Among my people, we have a tradition. When a gift is given that demands nothing, we give something in return that can never be forgotten." Sevens. He lifted the staff. "This is the staff of the generous heart. It will live here, in your town, for 1 year. Each time someone shows kindness without expectation, a mark will be carved into it. In 1 year's time, it will return to us and then return again here." Sevens. Murmurs rippled. Martha stepped forward. "A new tradition?" Sevens. "Yes." Gideon nodded. "One that belongs to both of us now." Sevens. Gideon turned to Sterling, who gently unfolded the original brown coat. He knelt before Maggie, who stood beside her mother on the post steps. "This coat began everything," he said, "and now it returns to its keeper." Sevens. He held it out with both hands. "Not because we need it, but because it is yours, a reminder of the day you changed more than one life." Sevens. Maggie accepted it, her hands trembling slightly, not from cold, but from understanding. Sterling added softly, "Keep it, not to wear, but to remember." Sevens. As the tribal members began sharing the items they had brought, blankets, tools, art, stories, the townspeople responded in a way no one had predicted. They stayed. They listened. They asked questions. Children gathered around the tribal storytellers. Mothers exchanged herbal recipes. One of the town's blacksmiths traded his iron nails for a carved antler knife and swore it was the fairest trade he'd ever made. Henrik didn't speak much, but later that night, he carved his own mark into the staff. a tiny horseshoe, his symbol. I figure, he grumbled, kindness starts with holding your tongue. Sevens, Martha smiled. The most powerful stories aren't just told, they are lived again, each time someone chooses kindness. Sevens. The snow had returned, as it always did. But this winter, something was different. In the center of the trading post stood a new structure, a wooden shelter built to protect a single object, the staff of the generous heart. It bore now 12 carvings, each a small story, each mark etched by hands that had acted when no one asked them to. There was sevens. A flame for the school teacher who shared her fire with a sick neighbor. A leaf for a child who gave his lunch to a hungry traveler. A swirl for the old widow who took in a lost dog during the storm. And beneath all of them, at the base, remained the horseshoe, Henrik's quiet symbol of changed hearts. The staff had become something more than wood and legend. It had become a mirror of what the town could be. Maggie Voss, now 9 years old, had grown in ways no one could measure with inches. She still wore the ceremonial coat on special days. She had hung the pendant above her bed, but her most precious possession was the old brown coat, folded in a wooden box, beside a note she'd written in crooked handwriting. Sevens. The first warm thing I ever gave. Sevens. Every month, she returned to the staff's shelter to clean the snow from its base and polish the carvings. Everyone now called her something quietly sacred. Sevens, the keeper of the flame. Sevens. On the exact day, 1 year later, the tribal procession returned. This time, there were no skeptics waiting, only anticipation. Gideon Nash, older now in posture but not in purpose, walked beside Sterling, who carried a staff of his own. Maggie ran to meet them halfway, snow puffing around her boots. They embraced. No words were needed. The townspeople gathered in a great circle, tribal members, settlers, children, elders, all standing around the staff. Gideon addressed the crowd. 1 year ago, a child reminded us that kindness is not just an idea, it is a decision. Today, we bring a new staff, one to take back to our home. And this one, he gestured to the original, will remain here, adding stories for another year. Sevens. The townspeople clapped, not politely, but earnestly. Sterling turned to Maggie. Would you be the one to carve the first mark into the new staff? Sevens. Maggie's eyes lit up. She accepted the carving tool with reverent hands and knelt beside the new staff. Her mark was small, just a spiral. It means something good begins here, she whispered. That evening, the two communities feasted together, venison stew, baked apples, smoked herbs. Children from both villages played snowball games while elders exchanged stories by the fireside. Martha read aloud a new poem she'd written, titled The Girl Who Carried the Season. Sevens. Henrik made biscuits. Clementine laughed more than she had in years. Turn. And Maggie sat with Sterling, who spoke in low tones about the ancestors, the wind, and how coats are not just garments, but promises. As the stars blinked awake in the dark sky, Gideon raised a single lantern and spoke one final time. Sevens. Tonight, the story of the coat becomes legend, but only if we choose to live it, again and again. Sevens. Years later, visitors passing through the valley would stop at the staff shelter, reading the carvings like a sacred journal. They'd ask, who was the first? Sevens, and always, someone would answer. Sevens, a little girl. She gave her only coat to a man in the snow. That's where it began. 7, they'd see a faded brown coat inside a glass case, and beside it, a carved plaque. Sevens. She saw need, not difference. She gave warmth, not fear, and we became more human because of her